Thanks. I'm Emily Ozer. I'm a psychologist and on the faculty of the UC Berkeley School of Public Health. And I'm going to be talking about power and inequality from a slightly different angle in terms of the intervention work that I do with young people. So one aspect of my research program focuses on studying processes of empowerment, psychological, political, and economic. And I use the term empowerment with caution. It's been so overused as to lose meaning in a lot of ways. But here I'm referring to a general definition from community psychology as empowerment is the process by which people, organizations, and communities gain mastery over issues of concern to them. So my work touches on groups and group identity in several ways, but not so focused on capital G groups in the same way my colleagues. Some of my international research and consulting has been concerned with measuring the impact of large-scale economic and social interventions for very poor, sort of the poorest of the poor in Mexico and Chile, for example. And so I collaborate with colleagues who are economists and nutritional scientists, and they're looking at, for example, what is the impact of income supplement or conditional cash transfer programs on child development or people's economic status, where I'm asking questions about how does this affect people's mental health, both of mothers and of children, and also more kind of nuanced processes about citizenship and entitlement for some interventions that are focused on trying to bring the most marginalized populations into the civil society more. But what I want to focus on today with the brief time is research that focuses on evaluating a specific kind of empowerment process in urban teens attending public schools. And we talked about this in our multiple lunch meetings about we don't really typically think of young people as a group in the same way that we might think of a racial category. And in many ways, young people are seen as very privileged and taken care of, but also they have very limited rights and power in a lot of ways and in a lot of settings. And since John Dewey 100 years ago, there have been very strong critiques of U.S. public schools as settings for raising participants in a democracy in terms of how education is structured and the experience of students in schools. In the 1990s, Jackie Eccles of University of Michigan coined the term developmental mismatch to describe the process of young people moving through the U.S. educational system, the public educational system, and sort of the mismatch between the kinds of power opportunities that they have as they age and what they're developmentally ready for. So many of you have probably spent time in a kindergarten or an early elementary school classroom, and when you walk in, you may notice that sometimes there are sort of handwritten rules for behavior, and often the teacher invites the students, kindergartners even, to come up with what are the rules about how we're going to treat each other. That's something they may do in the first week of classes. And even though these students obviously also have to live by other rules that they didn't come up with, at least they're invited to share their views and they're taken seriously. But as young people move into middle schools and high schools, the opportunities for them to exercise any power over issues of importance to them, key importance to them, actually gets smaller at the very time when developmentally they're more ready to take part in decision-making over their lives. And this lack of agency or control for young people is particularly palpable if you spend time in urban public schools that typically serve lower-income students of color. There's, a definite sense of lockdown when you walk in the school because of safety concerns of fighting or gangs with, hall passes and security guards on walkie-talkies, et cetera. And so there's a general sense of having a lot less power, even compared to the elementary schools. But in these urban contexts, at the same time, there's been a recent movement focused on positive youth development. And in a lot of ways, this has been a response to what I think a valid criticism about the pathologizing of teenagers, particularly teens of color. And there's been a profusion, hundreds of youth development programs, youth organizing, youth video, et cetera, in the U.S. that are seeking to, quote unquote, empower young people. These programs are developed and run outside of a university or research context and usually aren't subjected to any kind of systematic evaluation. And so my recent work has been about promoting and studying the effects of a particular kind of youth development intervention called youth-led participatory research, in which young people are trained as social scientists to identify a problem that they want to study and change. One of my studies involved an experiment with 70 classrooms of students in public high schools in San Francisco to test the effects of this youth-led research intervention on the young people as well as on their schools, and to see, do we see any evidence that this kind of approach can address the developmental mismatch problem and create opportunities for them, for teenage students to influence policies and practices. So mostly, if you think back to your own high school experiences or have high school students, the kinds of things that the student council and that students get to decide on are what I call the school spirit domain, you know, pajama days and colors for the prom and that kind of thing, which of course are meaningful, but they're not exactly core educational issues that a lot of these students are dealing with. And in contrast, what we found is that in most of the cases where the youth research program was going on at the school, students did become engaged and gathered research and presented findings on issues such as teacher instructional practices or cyberbullying or inter-ethnic group mingling. And so there was some, you know, it wasn't perfect, but there was definitely some evidence of some expansion of roles into what I call collegial or expert roles for young people, which is a big shift, as well as expansion of their social networks to include more powerful adults and teenagers from other cliques. So to understand complex intervention such as this one and their possible effects, I've used a combination of surveys, interviews, classroom observations, and participant observation. And it's been a big challenge integrating these different methods, particularly those that go beyond the focus of my psychological training. And one of the major goals I have for me at the center is to engage in the kind of discussions with you to understand other ways of conceptualizing and operationalizing power and changes in power, both in school settings and in other kind of settings. So with that, I think we have a few minutes for exchange among us, and then we can open it up.